I'd like to call to order a special meeting of the Frankfort Plant Board on Tuesday, July 21st, 2020 at 5 o'clock at the Frankfort Plant Board. This is being conducted in accordance with the Governor's Executive Order related to open meetings. And before we call the attendance, I'd like to introduce our new FPB board member, Kathryn Dutton-Mitchell, and ask her if she wants to say a few things and then administer the oath to you.
Well, I just want to say that I'm honored to join you all, and I admire all the hard work that I can tell that you've all put in, and I will do my best to jump in and help, and I'm glad to meet you all.
Well, we look forward to you being on the board, and I think you'll find it's a really good group of employees, and it's a good board, and I think you'll enjoy your service. It's a great organization.
Great.
So if we can, I guess in order to maintain social distancing, I don't guess there's a requirement to stand.
No.
Okay, so you ready?
Yes.
To raise your right hand?
Yes.
Okay. I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth, and be faithful and true to the Commonwealth of Kentucky so long as I continue a citizen thereof, and that I will faithfully execute to the best of my ability the office of member of the Electric and Water Plant Board of the City of Frankfort, Kentucky, according to the law. And I do further solemnly swear that since the adoption of the present Constitution, I, being a citizen of this state, have not fought a duel with deadly weapons within this state, nor out of it, nor have I sent or accepted a challenge to fight a duel with deadly weapons, nor have I acted as a second in carrying a challenge, nor aided or assisted any person thus offering, so help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, you're on the board.
Thank you.
Okay, Kathy, you want to call the roll?
Member Hale? Member Cubine?
Here.
Member Mason?
Here.
Member Snyder?
Here.
Member Dutton-Mitchell?
Here.
We have a quorum to do business. The next item is approval of minutes from the June 16th board meeting. Everybody has a copy there. Any questions, changes, revisions?
In order, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
No second.
Okay, any further discussion? Being no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes adopted. Next item is accept the financials. And as I understand it, due to the financial documents ending June 30th and 31st will be presented at the 18th meeting. Do you want to make any comments on that?
Sure, Mr. Cubine. It takes us just a matter of minutes to close the accounting period any given month, but for the year, once we close the accounting period, it takes us a little while to reconcile the accounts and get the financials into shape for our annual audit. The plant board is required per statute to have an annual audit, which the board has retained Crow LLP. We'll already have had interim field work, and we'll be beginning our regular audit field work starting next week. And we look to deliver that audit to the board around September, October. But yes, we will have the final documents for June 30, 2020 and July at the August 18th meeting.
I know it's preliminary, but at this point, based on looking at the expenditures and revenues, does everything look like we closed about where you thought it would be?
We did. There is some year-end adjustments that we always need to make. One of our biggest one being our currently still unfunded liability with Kentucky Retirement. We were better than expected as far as our financial performance. So even with those adjustments, I think we're going to come in just fine and be able to meet all of our bond covenants as relates to debt service and those types of items. So I think we'll be good for the year and starting off ready for 2020-21.
Any questions, David? Okay, next one. Kathy, did we have any public comments submitted or any comments that we need to be aware of?
No, sir.
Okay, number 6, these are the departmental reports that basically, because of the governor's recent executive order limiting meetings to 10 people or less, we basically have all these reports are on the website. They're all public records, but we've basically did not ask staff to be here in attendance tonight to reduce the number of people here. But at this point, Gary, I turn it over to you. Is there anything we need to highlight there or talk about?
No, not really. Thank you.
And I think, Mr. Foster, you had something you want to talk about.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. As I'm sure you're aware, Alan Smith, our water distribution superintendent, this will be his last board meeting. Alan's coming in now and to the podium. So even though he's not doing a departmental report this time, we did want to recognize Alan and his long career at the plant board. So if you'll indulge me for just a moment, I'd like to make a little bit of a statement, and I kind of put this statement together working with the other water management folks, Brian Bourne, the assistant water superintendent, David Billings, the director of water, Julie Roney, the water treatment plant superintendent, and Brandon Powers, the assistant water treatment plant superintendent. So Alan started his career with the water department on September the 5th of 1989. That would be the year I graduated high school. Alan Smith has worked in the water distribution department for over 30 years and holds a 4th class distribution and backflow tester's license. He's worked in every area of the water distribution system, from meter changeouts to new water main construction. He's been involved with the flushing, backflow, and leak detection programs for over 25 years and has been an integral part of the reservoir inspections and maintenance throughout his career. Alan became system maintenance supervisor in 2006 and was responsible for all tanks and pump stations. In 2014, he became the assistant water superintendent and assisted in the planning and implementation of new water main construction and line replacement projects, GIS improvements, and reservoir improvements. In 2016, he became our water superintendent, and he has overseen several large water main replacement projects and the preparation for the reservoir replacement project. Throughout his career, Alan has been involved with the Kentucky Water and Wastewater Operators Association and served on the state board and was a member of Bluegrass Cross Connection. From a technical standpoint, Alan's vast knowledge of our distribution system continues to be shared with the younger employees, and he truly will be missed. But more importantly, on a personal level, you cannot find a better person, coworker, and friend. I have known Alan for his entire plant board career, and through those years of working with him, even through his personal ups and downs, promotions, increased responsibilities, Alan has always been the same person, humble, kind, and always willing to stop at a second's notice and help anyone for as long as it takes. Alan, thank you for your hard work, your camaraderie through the years. Your efforts have definitely made a difference in this community and your coworkers. So we will miss you, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
I've gotten 30 years to serve our community and the plant board, and it's been a great experience. You know, we drive by a lot of those projects every day, and it makes you proud to know that you were a part of improvements to the system and to the community. I thank you.
Well, I might just say, of course, Alan has starred on many billboards here in town. And the other thing, which I don't think probably is documented in your personnel file, but I know for a fact that virtually there's no place in this community, many times on your own time, that you haven't touched in helping them with any water problems, anything they need, city government, county, anybody in town, water districts, anybody that needed technical advice or assistance or somebody to actually get in there and do something, that you've done it for this community for years. A lot of times, like I said, after hours, whenever it needed to be done, and I think everybody owes you a huge debt of gratitude for what you've done.
It's been a pleasure, and I hope I get to continue to serve this community in some fashion in the future. So.
Well, you could just not retire.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an option, you know.
I think it's time for me to move out of the way and let the next generation lead the plant board. We've got a lot of good young men that are ready to lead, and it's their opportunity, but I'm just a phone call away. So.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if you have a moment, we'd like to play a small video that kind of highlights Alan's career.
Congratulations, Alan, on the 30 years of service. We appreciate working with you, and thank you very much.
Alan, congratulations on your 30 years of service. It has been a pleasure working for you for the past 26.
Appreciate your dedication to the company and the community. The water department is a better water department because of you, and you had a lot to do with it.
Alan, congratulations on 30 years of service.
Alan Smith, congratulations on 30 years with the Frankfort Plant Board.
Congratulations, Alan, on 30 years of service. It's been a pleasure working with you.
When I think of plant board employees, I think of people being salt of the earth type people, and Alan, you really embody that. And your service to the community, this company, and all of your coworkers is greatly appreciated. So thank you for the last 30 years.
Hey, Alan, congratulations on 30 years of service. We appreciate all your hard work and dedication over the years.
Congratulations on 30 years, Alan.
Congrats on 30 years.
I've enjoyed working with you for the last 22 years, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Congratulations, Alan.
Hey, Alan, 30 years of service, that's a long time. I want to tell you congratulations.
Alan, wow, 30 years of service with the Frankfort Plant Board. I've been fortunate enough to work with you 23 of those 30 years. Your commitment to the water industry, your commitment to this community, and your commitment to your employees has been outstanding. Your friendship to us has been outstanding as well. And I'd just like to say happy 30 years and congratulations.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Alan.
Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next item is item 7.1. Consider accepting the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center's Community Solar Feasibility Study for the Frankfort Plant Board. And I might mention this came up, especially Kathryn, for background. Several months ago, some people in the community brought us some information from North Carolina State that they'd done some work on community solar and asked us if we'd review it. We did, and Gary and Vint worked with North Carolina State, provided them the data. They came in, reviewed our information, and then have made the report back. So they've arranged for the North Carolina State to make the presentation tonight. By accepting it, all we'd be doing is saying we've received the report. The report is public. It'll be on our website. And then hopefully at a later date, if there's interest in the community, we can have a discussion where we can have in person. So all we'd be doing tonight is hearing the information from NC State and hearing their presentation, giving everybody a chance to digest the report, and then come back at a later time and have some discussions or public comment or whatever. Is that fair to say, Vint?
Yes, sir.
So I guess turn it over to you and Gary.
Okay, if you're fine, I will just introduce our guest speaker by video. Our guest speaker is David Sarkeesian. He's the Senior Policy Analyst at NCC's ETC. He's conducted the feasibility study, as you mentioned, and he'll present his report and technical findings via the video. The NCC ETC has compiled this report assessing the viability of community solar program for the Frankfort Plant Board. The analysis provided a technical and economic model for a 100 kW and a 250 kW photovoltaic solar system. The analysis also includes fundamental design considerations and parameters for a community solar project. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Sarkeesian and let him give the presentation for us. David?
All right, thank you, Ben. And thanks everybody on the board for having me tonight. I made contact with Vint and Gary starting last fall about possibly looking at a community solar project for Frankfort Plant Board. So I'm part of the Clean Energy Technology Center, which is a public service center at NC State University. So that's why there's both of those names. And I'm going to open up my PowerPoint here and share the screen, and let me know if someone can't see it. All right. So this is our presentation that gives a summary of the written report, which is a longer written document that will have more details on the report that we did. So I was the leader on this project, and then I also had help from Simon Sandler and Sarah Thornton, who are on our engineering and quantitative team here. All right, so this just gives some introduction to the Clean Energy Technology Center and our different work areas. But so our work on community solar has been funded by a federal Department of Energy grant, where we take funding from them and then have been working specifically with municipal and cooperative public utilities in the southeastern U.S. Most of them have been in North Carolina and Virginia, but we've done a few in other states across the region. and it's probably our flagship project that has actually started up now is the project in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We've got more information about that available on our project website as well as on Fayetteville's website themselves. Okay, so but for now getting into what we did for the Frankfort possible project, what we wanted to do was to look at the economics and economic feasibility of a community solar program for Frankfort that would provide maximum benefits both to the utility and its finances and to possible community subscribers. So I should note that this project, we didn't take into account anything like environmental benefits or social benefits, things like that. This is pretty much purely economic. So factors like that can come into consideration, of course, when your own analysis, but that wasn't part of this analysis. All right, and then we compared two systems. We looked at a 100 kilowatt system and a 250 kilowatt system using a range of possible system costs per watt. Now, both of these systems are probably on the smaller end of possible community solar systems. For comparison, like the usual residential solar system size is about 10 kilowatts. So this is substantially larger than that, but then some of the larger utility scale projects can get up into the tens or even hundreds of megawatts. All right, so the approach we used for this, we used the system advisor model from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. This provides, this gathers weather data for specific locations, and we use this to estimate what the production would be from these hypothetical solar systems in any given hour across past years. Then we also had data on the annual peak demand periods from previous years, which was provided by Frankfort Plant Board and by Kentucky Municipal Energy Agency. And so using that data and the weather data, we were able to match up what production would have been like in previous demand peaks, and from that get an idea of how likely it was that the production from these solar systems would match up with demand peaks and be able to provide capacity value. All right, so this is some technical details on the proposed systems. These would both be fixed rather than one-axis or multi-axis tracking, ground-mounted PV systems rather than rooftop. They face south, and they have a conversion ratio from direct current to AC to alternating current of 96%, and are the standard silicon PV module rather than some of the other more esoteric panel types. All right, so we used estimates for the economic modeling and for the capital costs. We took our estimates from NREL's solar system cost benchmark from 2018. And so our range of costs for that, which was set up to match the system size that we're looking at here, and we used a range of costs from $1.9 to $2.4 per watt. We assumed that there would be ongoing operation and maintenance costs as well as equipment replacement costs, which are built into the model. Inflation is calculated in for those costs at 2% annually. And then we assume the solar energy, the solar panels themselves will have production degrade annually by 0.6%. And probably the most complicated economic modeling part is figuring out the capacity credit. And for that, we would average the demand reduction from the 4 previous years that would have occurred and use that as in combination with the capacity rates from KyMEA to determine what the value of those that demand reduction would be in future years. And we've got this now. Of course, this is in actual functioning. That's going to be smaller or greater each given year because the weather will vary, but this approach should give a good average for the whole lifetime of the project. All right, and so probably the most important factor in the analysis here are these wholesale energy and capacity rates, which is what FPB would be able to get in credit for the generation and capacity value of the community solar project. As you can see, the credits that you would get are different than the energy and demand rates that are charged to you by KyMEA. So these are the average values in these credits, and then on this chart gives the values that go forward across all of the different years. And we can see that the capacity credit is based on the annual peak demand, which is more often a summer peak rather than winter, which tends to be beneficial for a solar system, which tends to produce more in the summer. Now to get into the actual project economics. So when looking at solar system costs, and for an actual project, you would get into a lot of things, including both the actual panels themselves and the equipment to set those up, and then other things like interconnection costs, land, and taxes. So since we didn't have an actual location for this proposed yet, we used kind of an aggregate system cost data, which includes all of those things from NREL, and that gives that range of 1.9 to 2.4 watts. And so now we can get into the actual economic analysis here. You can see this is for the 100 kilowatt project. You can see what the average cost of $2.1 per watt. The payback on this ends up looking not very good. The payback ends up being longer than 25 years, which is longer than the entire lifetime of the project, which is 25 years. And so that basically means that it doesn't make back all of those capital costs. And then the situation for the 250 kilowatt system is similar, since though we looked at both of those sizes, the difference in those two sizes isn't great enough for there to be a significant difference in like economies of scale. So the economics end up pretty much identical, but just at a multiplied by the 2.5. And since those were so similar, we did an additional analysis to look at to kind of find a break-even capital cost. And this would be what cost per watt you would need to get in order to get a simple payback simple payback of 25 years, or a net present value of 0, which would mean that investment breaks even at a 4% discount rate. And for both of these, for the simple payback, you would end up needing to get a cost of about $0.45 per watt direct current in both cases. And then for the NPV equals 0, you need to go even lower at about $0.29 per watt. Now, both of those are quite low figures. I can say for some of the projects we've looked at for other utilities throughout in this grant, we've used costs that have gotten down to as low as about 1.5 watts per dollars per watt for a system that was more like 2 megawatts. So to get to cost per or dollars per watt in system costs like this, you would need to be looking at very, very large utility scale projects, probably rather than anything you would call a community scale solar project. And this gives a graph of the system savings, which is the credits per year. It's not a net savings thing. You can see the energy savings are actually the vast majority of this, with the demand or capacity savings being quite a bit less. And some of the other projects we've looked at and other scenarios that have been more favorable, the demand has been usually at least half and often more than half of the value instead. And this is showing the cash flow for the project over time. You can see the cumulative cash flow ends up well into the negative for both of them, even at the end of the project. All right, so the conclusion of this is because of the relatively low rates that you would receive for energy, and especially for capacity value, you get a very long payback period and negative net present value on the economics for these projects. And say that a somewhat larger scale project would probably have somewhat better economic performance, but as we saw with those break-even analysis, it would have to be really big for it to break even using those credits. Now, I should say that this doesn't necessarily apply to like solar projects that you'd be buying either at the retail level, like from customer generators, or solar that's procured through your wholesale supplier, because this is driven mostly by the fact that you're having to sell this energy back to the supplier rather than using it to meet your own demand. And in both of those other scenarios, the credit rates might be quite different. So don't take this to implicate everything for solar, but just for the specific community solar situation. All right, so I can take questions on that if anyone has any.
David, thank you for the presentation. And I guess first, maybe let Gary or Vint make any comments and then open it up for questions.
Mr. Chairman, I really don't have much. This is the community has an interest for that. And that's one of the reasons NC State, they can help us. They have the federal grant to support it. So the study is well done, it's good study. And it is a matter of, just like you mentioned in the beginning, is if the committee has an interest on that, then there could be potential the board can consider in the future.
And when is KyMEA bringing on its solar?
Their project supposed online December 2022 is a very large project. 54 megawatts belong to KyMEA. It's in Western Kentucky, nearby Princeton.
Okay.
Princeton.
Vin, did you have any comments?
No, not really, Mr. Chairman, short of kind of what Gary said. I think, obviously with the economics, I don't think it right now makes sense for a particular small-scale solar, strictly from a financial standpoint. Obviously, as Mr. Sarkeesian said, when he started out, there are other considerations that, people discuss when they do solar. But we do have that large-scale solar project coming online in just a couple of years and through KyMEA. So I think that, we certainly are including solar in our portfolio in the very near term, and I wouldn't be surprised in the future if we include additional utility scale. Obviously, the prices are, as Mr. Sarkeesian was alluding to, as you get larger and larger scale projects, the price comes down, economies of scale. So in this particular case, I would agree with the assessment that it doesn't seem to make strict financial sense on a small scale community solar as we're evaluating here.
Okay. David, open it up now, David, if it's okay with you, to the other board members to ask any questions. Anybody? Sure.
John.
Yes, Steve.
I'll go on. I'll wait.
Okay. Kathryn?
Mr. Sarkeesian, I have a question about, would there be any benefit, aside from the fact that it doesn't look financially viable right now, to waiting for a project like this? Like, would the capital cost be cheaper in the future, foreseeable future? Do you have any advice concerning that?
I'd say panel cost likely will keep declining. And I'm not exactly certain on what how any rules with KyMEA or anything might change in the future, but I can say those costs for this scale of project, I mean, it would have to come down quite a bit for these scenarios to start looking substantially better.
And one more question. Besides the cost, or I guess basically the reimbursement rate for the energy, the buyback, is there any other factor, like is our weather not amenable to this? Is there any other factor that we really can't change that we need to take into account?
No, the weather is actually, it's very comparable to other projects we've looked at. Across all of these projects, the single most important factor, and usually the entirely driving factors, have been these buyback rates. And if it was more similar to what your actual the demand rates you're charged, it would be a quite different story. I've not run the exact economics on that, but it would be considerably different.
All right. Thank you for your work.
Steve?
Yes, what you said, a larger project could make it more feasible. Can you give a level of what size a larger project would be? And then I guess I would ask Vint and Gary if that size project is practical, impractical, or so just to get an idea where we would have to break even.
So to match those system costs ahead and the break-even ones, that would be a very large utility scale project, likely in the hundreds of megawatts.
Oh,
okay.
Which is probably, I think, a 2 megawatt project, which we've looked at. It would start looking much better than it was here, but I still probably wouldn't say that it would be feasible.
Okay.
Well, and again, I don't want you to, I think this is mostly driven by the wholesale contract here. The costs in weather and for the solar system itself are pretty comparable to things we've looked at where it ended up actually working out for a system closer to this size. But it's just what the all requirements contract set up the way it is. It's hard to have space for that additional generation.
Ben, just let me ask you real quick. Once the KyMEA solar project comes online, what percent of the KyMEA portfolio, which is what, about 300 megawatts? What percent will be solar and coal as compared to what it is now?
So when this project comes on, the solar project, not this project, the solar project in Western Kentucky comes online, that will be about 50 megawatts. Was it 54?
54.
Right. 54 megawatts out of the 300. And currently there are two pieces that are coal, two 100 megawatt pieces that are coal. One of those 100 megawatt pieces rolls off here in another couple of years. I think it was at 22 as well.
Yes, and end of May 22, the 100 megawatt will be rolled out, just like Wen mentioned that. So these projects after that, I'm talking about KyMEA solar. It's a December 2022. Little gap there, but this is something can replace some of the energy and some of the capacity for that 100.
For purposes of, David, for purposes of your analysis, did you use the assumption of the KyMEA solar coming online and those rates, or did you assume the current power mix stayed the same for 25 years?
I was not given information on that. I was just given rates directly by Doug Maresh at KyMEA. I would assume that those do include any capacity additions that KyMEA is planning to come online in the future.
So your assumption is, the assumption would be that the solar rates replacing the coal rates were factored into this analysis.
The capacity rates that KyMEA provided to Mr. Sarkeesian did include the expected portfolio as much as we know. Now that is part of what the IRP, again, I said that 100 megawatts of coal rolls off in just a couple of years. And that's part of what this IRP process that will wrap up in December is determining what do we replace that puzzle with. So we're going down in the amount of coal generation we have, and we'll be replaced with, part of it will be solar and part of it will be what is determined through the IRP process. So, but those rates, as much as could be determined, were included in the information that Mr. Baresh gave.
Okay. John? Dawn?
Just one comment. So when the Western Kentucky solar comes on, then is it about 10% of our portfolio will be renewables?
10%. Yeah, I mean, your capacity credits for solar projects sometimes are figured a little differently.
If you look at energy, that's probably 10%, kind of roughly right now calculation. But if you look at a capacity size-wise, we have this summer like a 260, but 54 of the 260 we solar, but that's the capacity. So depends on how do you compare it. You compare energy or compare to the capacity. But by the way, actually, since you mentioned that, KyMEA, just like Frankfort, we do have a part of a hydro project, as all you know, every month we reported. So that's total together, that's a 30-some megawatts hydro is in the whole KyMEA portfolio also. So it's more than just 54 solar. There's a 30-some. When do you remember? 33, 32
It's about
megawatts?
30, something like that. If you take Frankfort's portion of roughly we're half of KyMEA's load, so just assuming that, you would say that maybe 25% of that, 25 megawatts of that solar might be considered, Frankfort's half of the load, and our capacity for the SEPA hydro is currently running around 15.6. So that would be 25. There's about 40 of our 140 megawatts would be what you might call carbon-free, carbon-neutral. So I think that's certainly much better than many, many, many utilities are in that position. So I think the bigger thing is, while this particular piece of the solar may not make sense because of our rates and different things that we have, I don't think that in any way reflects that the Frankfort Plant Board or we as a staff think, that solar is not a good answer to a lot of things, because it is. Obviously, I think that's reflected in our desire with KyMEA to have solar as part of our portfolio.
Yeah, I would chime in and say like any of the analysis here definitely doesn't pertain to anything you're getting through KyMEA directly rather than adding yourself. So I wouldn't let that color any interpretations of what you're doing with this larger project.
Well, I think at this point, if we don't have any other questions, first, David, again, thank you for your work and helping us on this. Two, we're going to have a presentation later talking about the rates review, and then we're going to allow this for people to submit any comments, questions. So if there's no other discussion, what I'd ask for is a motion to accept the report as we received it. And then based on comments we received and after everybody's had a chance to review it, and we get some other information, then revisit it at that point. So do I have a motion to accept the report?
So moved.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Well, I just would like to clarify that by accepting the report, we are receiving the report.
Yes, that's it. Yes.
That's all.
Yeah, we're not taking any action on it. Without further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Report's accepted. David, again, thank you very much for your help on this, and we'll probably be talking to you again here.
All right, sure. Feel free to send me any questions. I'd love to talk to you again about it.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Next item, 7.2, is consider approval of the 2nd Street Tiger Project, City Frankfort Plant Board Reimbursement Agreement, Amendment Number 1, Vent and Hans.
We had too much limelight tonight, but I'll fire it up again.
Well, you're by the big screen,
I guess so. That's what it is. As most people are aware, you've heard about the Tiger project that the City of Frankfort, the Tiger grant, the City of Frankfort got to redo the streets on 2nd Street. And as part of that project, we are relocating some utilities, both telecommunications, electric, and water. That has been in the works since the project began. They were reimbursing us for the Tiger grant, and the city were reimbursing us for some of that work. And those things are reflected in the budget. As we moved along through the project, the city has determined that they would like to move some of the overhead utilities, additional overhead utilities underground. And so in doing so, that obviously increases the cost. And so the agreement here basically ups the amount that they are going to reimburse us to cover the changes of adding additional utilities underground on the 2nd Street project. So for instance, the Tiger grant was going to cover the telecommunications and the electric project that would be moved underground. It was doing that before. The additions, this additional monies cover that for the water department. In this particular situation, there's no change. About half of the money was going to come from the Frankfort Plant Board. That's reflected in our current budget. And half of the money was going to come from the Tiger grant. So those things are all the same. We're going to do a little additional work on the Tiger project, and they're going to reimburse us for that additional work. So the bottom line is there's no additional monies coming out of the Frankfort Plant Board's coffers for this particular project. And I think it will help the project look better and be a nicer addition overall. Enhance, I'm just talking about what the project was from the legal aspect of the contract.
Just an amendment to the contract before it's already executed, so nothing noteworthy about it.
Okay. Any questions of Vint or Hans? There's no questions. Do you have a motion?
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Was all the amount that was Frankfort Plant Board was responsible for, was that all in this year in the budget, or was any of that scheduled to go through next year's budget?
The budget that you approved,
we just approved, is it all in this?
All of it's in there.
We just approved?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. There's a line in the water budget you'll see for $150,000, I believe, on that.
No,
John.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if I'm clear what Ben has just said. Is he saying that they're asking us to put some extra utilities underground that we had not planned to do before?
Vint?
We were putting a portion of the utilities underground on 2nd Street, but they're asking us to put additional utilities underground. Okay. And we are, but they are going to reimburse us under the Tiger grant for that additional work. So the net, there is no negative to the plant board as far as finances.
All right, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have a motion?
Chair. So moved.
So moved.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Did you get it, Kathy? Did you get the motion second?
I got Steve for the motion. I didn't hear who seconded.
Kathryn.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? No. No discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's adopted. Next one is action item contract amendment with Weatherization Plus for the certified home energy audits. Travis? And I might just add, Kathryn, this was in the previous budget, and because of the pandemic, a lot of other things, all the energy audits that got scheduled that were budgeted for last time did not get expended. So we basically in this budget carried over the remaining amount into this budget, which is the $20,000, and this goes along with it. So I'll just turn to Travis, but this was in the last budget, and then the balance of it is in this budget, the money. Travis?
Yeah, I think Mr. Cubine covered the gist of it there. We started the home energy audit project last year. We did 35. The board agreed to add 20,000 to this year's budget to continue the project. We reached out to the contractor, Weatherization Plus, to make sure they were still interested in continuing with us. They are. They agreed to keep their same contract price. So what we're asking for this evening is for the board to approve an amendment, basically that just extends the contract date to June 30th of next year. I think all of our customers were happy with the work, at least those that we heard back from. I think they did a good job. Be happy to answer any questions.
Do we know when these, if we have we got anybody on a waiting list, and when will we start back on these?
I think if the amendment is approved whenever the customer is ready, assuming they're ready to accept people into their homes, then right away. I did ask that the contractor, a similar question. Are you working in people's homes, or do you feel comfortable doing that? They said they are, and they're interested in starting, whenever we direct them to.
Do we have anybody on a waiting list?
There were a few that had signed up kind of in that late February, March period that never got it completed. So the starting point, I would assume, would be we'll reach out to them and see if they're interested. If not, we'll just kind of open it back up to anyone. But yes, we would start with those that signed up and never got the service performed.
Mm-hmm. John?
The 20,000 is going to cover about how many audits?
It would be 40 to 50-ish, somewhere in that range, which probably I think will meet the demand. I'm assuming when we started the project last year, they were pretty hot and heavy for those first few weeks. You know, the people that had been waiting for that service for a while.
Right.
And then it trickled off to maybe a few a week. People would submit a request.
Okay.
As part of the contract, do they measure and come back and measure the effectiveness? I mean, if they do the weatherization, what's recommended, then how much energy saved, or do they measure the impact or the performance of getting the audit done?
This particular contract, no, they do not. Some utilities have done that, like a performance-based type of solution, which may be something the board should pursue at a later time. But this particular contract is just provide the service and then give the customer the report.
I know you got to build in weather net to looking at different periods of time in terms of, outcome and that, so.
Yeah, and part of the contract, that the service they perform, and the reason we've asked for outside help with this is they do the blower tests or thermography that can better account for different weather conditions, those kinds of things. And again, they're experts in that area, so they can provide more information to the customer.
Any other questions for Travis?
Sure.
Kathryn?
You're saying that this contractor doesn't go back in, but are we keeping any data on just the lowering of bills post weatherization?
Currently, we're not tracking, because it's a free program, we're not tracking improvements that have been made directly related to the audit. So at this point, it's just, here's your report, here's where we think you can make improvements, but there's no performance metrics on it currently.
If the customer wants to make the improvements and they're making that out of their own pocket?
That's correct, yes.
Well, the question, going to Kathryn's question she had, I think we do need to try to look at the data of perhaps the bills that follow the audit over maybe the next 6 months to see, one, obviously if the customer, the ratepayer, has followed the example, and two, even if they have, has it made a difference? Because there's no need of spending monies to do the audits if we aren't able to see any impact from them. And the other thing I'd like to say about these audits, which I said the last time when we implemented these things, that I would like to see them spread across the economic strata of the ratepayers, because historically, the people that are well informed, I guess, are, and I'm not saying it's right, but only certain people take advantage of potential saving opportunities. And I'd like to see us perhaps try to inform others, the broad spectrum of people, of the possibilities of saving money from this audits and taking advantage of these audits.
Gary, can you get with Travis and the contractor, whether it's the contractor or us, but build in some ability to do a look back and see what, if, I guess two-part. One, the audit was done, follow up with the customer and see, did you make the improvements? And then two, measure and see, was there any impact? Did the customer notice, or can we measure an impact on, if they made the improvements, did it make a difference in their bill?
Yeah, I think that's easy enough to do. It will be somewhat dependent upon customer involvement.
Right.
Some of them may prefer not to share, and I don't know how we'd want to handle that. If they say, no, I'm not going to tell you what I've done, then you may run into those situations.
But the point being, though, is that we have the data to their bills. We can see the usage that a person who has had an audit has done, and we can compare the prior year to the, I guess, going forward year to see if any impact, and if that should be our gauge to see whether this money is being spent well. Because, if there's a difference in their usage and their energy bill, then that should with whatever adjustments would have to be made for costs or rate costs or whatever, we should be able to see some change, if any.
Yeah, I think the one thing you have to kind of be cautious of when you look back at the previous year, if you had an extremely cold year or extremely hot year, it can drastically throw off your thing. So many
But
times.
that's part of the factors, Vince, that you would take into place when you do the analysis. I mean, it's not just going to be a vanilla black and white analysis. You have to take in all the factors that will come into play that determine what your cost would be for utilities. And so, given you're right, one year could be different than the other in terms of weather, but you put a factor, a mathematical factor or something to those factors to compare apples to apples.
Mr. Chairman, we can try that, try to use our data as long as we limit address, customer, private information, then we can see a high level, anything we can find out. Another front is we could potentially approach the certified customer already use auditing, ask them directly, did they done any project improve their efficiency, right? We can go multiple ways, try to see the result of it. On the second part, the question Ms. Mason mentioned that how do we approach the customer, let them know the program we have. That's the things we done. I believe Cassie them help us, done the social media promotion, newspaper, all that. But we can go further. Maybe, I can check into last time, did we print out a bill?
Or put something in the insert or something.
That. Then I can reach every household. Try to see going to work on that. One thing I do want to mention, last time the board meeting, when the board made the decision for this program, because it's a new program, it's popular, and they worry about it, there's a limited resource, too many people want it. But end up we did it, right? It's only 35 them process. But they limit this program not include the board member. So I just want to mention that to you, let you know that if we do down the road have a more space than the customer needed, do you still want to continue execute you board member yourself? I mean, that's just I just want to mention that you know that. Yeah.
Any other questions for Travis? Okay, so what's before us is to amend the contract to allow for the additional audits, item 7.3. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion to amend the contract.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Contract's amended. Thank you, Travis. Okay, item 7.4, consider plan amendment for FPB employee health plan, well living provision for the 2020 plan year. Diane, are you with us? Oh, Nichelle. Kathryn, you'll find out. Best human resources health person in America.
Thank you. Good evening. Each year at open enrollment for health insurance, employees have the option to elect a will living plan. Will living plans require specific medical tests aimed at early detection and prevention of conditions, included but not limited to diabetes, hypertension, and coronary artery disease. In exchange, participants are subject to lower premium contributions. This year, during the first several months of the coronavirus outbreak, many medical facilities and physician offices were unavailable for non-essential medical testing. For this reason, staff asked the board to consider delaying the testing requirements due November 30th of 2020 until November 30th of 2021. If approved, Human Resources will notify plan participants. Any questions?
John?
Nichelle, is this anything we had to talk with Cigna about, or is this completely our call as to, if we want to make this, is anything the insurance, our carriers had to worry about here or weigh in on this change?
No, sir. It was strictly up to us.
Okay. Any other questions? Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I second it.
Second.
Any further discussion, question? Kathy, did you get the second? Kathryn and Steve seconded at exactly the same time, so you'll have to decide.
I put Steve down.
Okay.
Down.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Contract motion's adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you. You got the next one?
Yes.
Okay, this is consider amendments to the job classification and compensation plan, create a cable telecommunications assistant superintendent position, and I might add this position I think was approved or budgeted for. It was not approved, it was budgeted for when we adopted the budget for this current year. Is that correct, David?
Correct. It's on page 15 of our current budget, and yes, it is in there.
Okay.
Staff asked the board to consider approving the cable telecommunication assistant superintendent position, reporting to the cable telecommunication superintendent. This position is needed to assist the superintendent in planning, leading, organizing, directing, coordinating, and evaluating all activities and projects of the department, as well as for succession planning. Based on an evaluation of the job description, the recommended classification is 117, with a minimum starting pay of $79,988. The position is exempt. If approved, staff plans to post the position for internal and external candidates simultaneously. FPB has sufficient funds available in the current budget for this position. Any questions?
Okay, any questions? Dawn?
One of the things we've talked about as a board, and we're going to be talking about further, is more diversity in our hiring. And so are you making any plans in the external, application process to try to look at like Kentucky State or different areas where we might get a little more diversity?
Yes, ma'am. Currently, Angie, who does the hiring, she does send out notices to Kentucky State, their career counseling and placement, a couple of churches here in Frankfort. So she does have a list of contacts that she does make sure receives our advertisement for job postings.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then I think, Steve, if you might want to comment. Steve, Board Member Mason has been working with Diane and Gary and Ed to look at our entire, I think, recruitment program, our affirmative action, our outreach, and so forth. And whatever point, Steve, I think you're ready to make a report back to the board, we'll be discussing that in terms of any changes we might want to consider. Is that correct, Steve?
It is. I had also had a question about what's the qualifications, the education qualifications for that position?
I honestly don't have the job description with me right now. I can get back to you with those qualifications.
That's fine for me.
Have you got it, David?
I do. I'm looking at page 140 of the board packet. It says education from high school or equivalent supplemented by 8 years directly related work experience, including a minimum of 3 in an administrative or supervisory capacity. Additional education may be substituted for experience on a year-for-year basis.
So it's high school plus 8?
Yes, sir. Or equivalent supplemented by 8.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the assistant cable telecom superintendent position.
Do we have a second?
Second.
You got a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the big one of the evening. Consider fiscal year 2021 budget amendment to increase the electric rebate from $1.6 million to $2 million and approve issuance of $2 million rebate to electric operating revenues to eligible FPB electric customers. Mr. Denton, and I might just say, I don't want to take anyone's thunder, But I've been lobbied strongly by Mr. Snyder, who wants to make a motion after your presentation. So, David, take it.
Sure. In our fiscal year 2021 budget that the board approved just last month, we have included $1.6 million in electric rebate to refund wholesale power savings from our transition from our previous power supplier to KyMEA. We also in June, mid-June, were informed that as we transition away from Kentucky Utilities, there was a true-up that we received in the amount of right at $400,000 as we move away from that contract. So there's a request for an amendment to our budget of $400,000, increasing the rebate from $1.6 million to $2 million. And then this would be FPB customers that were to be eligible for the rebate. What we're proposing is that FPB electric customers on May 1 would be eligible for the rebate. We'll be looking back at the last 12 months of usage from May 2019 through April 2020, and we'll prorate the rebate based on the percentage of customers' bills related to all FPB electric customer bills. The credit would be put on bills to be received by August, customers in August, and that you must be a FPB customer when the rebate is issued to receive the credit. That's the proposed mechanism for issuing the rebate, and we're just asking for approval from the board to issue that.
Okay. Any questions of David?
Chair.
Kevin, sure.
How would you handle someone who had their utility cut off because of a past due credit, but they had paid during that period of time and maybe by some terms would have qualified for the rebate?
So let me make sure I understand the question. Making sure that before we account for all of the actual amounts paid by the customer, if they would have been cut off sometime during the 12-month period, maybe if you could restate that for me, I appreciate it.
Well, I mean, have you thought of that situation where someone, maybe they got cut off before May 1st, so they don't qualify, but they do have a past due amount. Would they be credited with what they would have received?
No, ma'am. If they were still an FPB customer, they would be eligible. But if they're cut off and do not return to us, they're no longer considered a customer and would not be eligible for the credit. So they would have to be an eligible customer. If you have a past due bill or you are cut off, which we did suspend cutoffs in March of 2020. So I don't know in this situation if we would even have this would occur, but it did start in 2019. You have to be an eligible customer to get it when we issue it. So if you have not returned from us after a cutoff, you're considered an inactive and no longer a customer of FPB.
Okay.
So they would not receive the rebate.
All right, so that makes sense. I wasn't taking into account the prohibition against cutting off during this COVID time. And for anybody with a past due account, that would just go toward their balance.
Yes, if we have customers that we do payment plans for people that have past due accounts, as long as they work on a payment plan with us, we'll continue to have them as a customer and work with them to get that caught up. So they would be eligible for the rebate and would get that applied to their bill to reduce their outstanding balance.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for David? Steve, you got any questions?
May I make the motion?
No, John desperately. John wants to make it back.
If Steve would like to make the motion.
Steve make the motion?
Steve would like to make the motion and knock himself out.
No, I'm good. I just said that for your benefit, John.
Mr. Chairman. Actually, since suggested by Ms. Snyder increase for 1.6 to 2 million, the average actually increase some, right?
It's a little over $40 is what you said?
Yes, sir. It's up around $8 from around 34 to 42 on the average residential customer usage.
And last year we gave out, what, about 30, the average was about 34 for residential?
It was, yes.
Yeah.
33, 34 for average.
So, do I have a motion?
Well, Mr. Chairman, some people would argue that having to amend the budget 3 weeks into the new fiscal year would be a sign of a bad budget by the previous board, but I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to make the motion we amend our 2020-2021 budget, increase the electric rebate amount from $1.6 million to $2 million, and then subsequently approve the issuance of a $2 million rebate to electric operating revenues to eligible FPB electric customers.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion's adopted. And what customers that get this in August, their August bill?
Yes, there'll be bills that'll be going out. I believe it's August 11th for cycle 1, August 26th for cycle 2, and they will be shown on that bill.
Thank you, sir. Next is informational policy discussion. This is the discussion of board governance policy and the board ethics policy and financial disclosure form. And Dawn's been working with Hans on this. So, Dawn, you or Hans want to kick it off?
Hans, you just want to talk about the ethics policy and the financial disclosure form?
I just have a little overview. Be glad to. I guess just a little bit of background for Ms. Mitchell. Welcome again to how we got here. Ms. Hale's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this project. She's kind of distilled a lot of the board governance policies that David circulated when he was serving as the interim general manager, and kind of selected the best portions of all of those and distilled that down to what we have for the governance policy. As far as the legal framework goes, as far as board governance, KRS 96174, it just notes that the board can adopt its own bylaws and rules of procedure. And one question that Mr. Schneider had asked, it also addresses the issue of discipline for board members. And it just says the secretary may be removed by the board for cause. But the question is whether that's just from the secretary's position, the entire board. There's no authority that discusses that. As far as the ethics policy goes, KRS 65003 is where that legal requirement stems from. And that's been extended to special purpose governmental entities like the plant board through Chapter 65A. And it just requires 4 basic elements: standards of conduct, a financial disclosure form, a nepotism policy, and then the designation of some person or group to maintain and look at those financial disclosure forms. So the board has a great deal of flexibility to adapt these documents to whatever the board would like them to be. I know this is kind of the first chance the board's had as a group to discuss all this, and Mr. Mason made the point in an earlier discussion with us at one time. He said, all the board members have different perspectives, and kind of bring all that to a project, and hopefully can kind of capture some of that tonight and incorporate that into the documents.
Yeah. If I could just inject, I checked with Charmaine today because I wanted to be sure that I didn't say the wrong thing. The city's ethics policy and financial disclosure form is given to all boards and commissions that receive a stipend, and all city commission candidates, the city commission, the city manager, and department heads all fill out the city's financial disclosure form and come under the city's ethics policy. And the reason we don't is because we're not paid by the city, we're paid by the plant board. Otherwise, we would, come under the city's ethics policy and financial disclosure form.
And just for background, Kathryn, we have a ethics commission, the plant board has, and we do file a financial disclosure. It is not as extensive or as detailed as the city. And I think, Hans, there's, based on your reading, that we're to have a policy at least as stringent.
Yes, sir.
As the city.
I think when you look at Chapter 65 and 65A, you're either equal to or greater than the city's policies, and you're in good shape.
And 2 reasons this is on for information tonight. One was, obviously, you're coming on brand new, and it wasn't fair to hit you with all this first time. Plus, for the other four of us on here, this has been talked about back and forth, and it's a lot of documentation, it's a lot of information, and I don't think anybody was ready tonight to vote on it or have a discussion on it. So that's why we scheduled it for information only, in both fairness to you, but fairness to everybody. Nobody was ready to adopt tonight, but we definitely, in some form or fashion, I think, have to deal with the ethics financial disclosure to some extent. Correct, Hans?
Yes, sir, correct.
The governance, there's two schools of thought. Might turn it over to John about whether we adopt a governance, whether we go in and beef up or add to our bylaws. But there's that discussion about how to approach that. But there's a lot of information, but I think Dawn's done a lot of research with other utilities and other entities in terms of how they approached it. So that's kind of how we got here.
Yeah, and I looked up the word stringent because, it says that our policy should be at least as stringent as the city's. So I just wanted to know what the word stringent exactly meant. And Merriam-Webster says stringent is tight, constricted, marked by rigor, strictness, or severity, especially in regard to rules or standards. Google Dictionary says strict, precise, and exacting. The Cambridge Dictionary says extremely limiting or difficult or severe. So just gives you an idea that our policy definitely is not as stringent as the city's, in my opinion. Excuse me?
The current one, not the
Right, the current one, right.
Steve?
Yeah, I guess, and I've said this to Don earlier, even last year when we started talking about these things, that first of all, I separate the financial disclosure from the governance policy. I mean, the financial disclosure, is apples to apples. If you want to do that, it's consistent with the city, whatever, that's fine. But my approach to the governance policy is probably is different than Don's. And I say this, I'd rather start off with a blank page and then start with what comes to our mind as priorities or things that are on our minds as it relates to the governance and board practices and those things, and then discuss each one of those individually so everyone has a complete understanding and education, and future board members will have education if they watch our meetings about what this particular governance point is, and then add a second and a third and a fourth. We may get to what Don has in a complete package, but when I go the other route, take a package that's already together, and I have to delete, edit, add to, whatever, I feel like there's a real risk of missing something or maybe taking something out of context in the document that changes another section's meaning, that you just run the risk of making, perhaps an unintended problem. So my approach, I don't mind doing the governance, and I've said this to Don, my approach though would be to start with a blank sheet of paper and write your first point and your second, your third and fourth and fifth or whatever until you have all you think you need as a governance package. So I just thought my approach is not going the opposite way.
If I could just fill in a little bit for Ms. Dutton-Mitchell's viewpoint. In probably early 2018, I was appointed to the board in September of 2017, and Mr. Denton was then the acting GM, and he made the mistake of letting me know about an APPA webinar on board governance. And so I took that webinar, and I think it was excellent. And one of the things that was talked about in the APPA webinar on board governance was having a board governance policy. About the same time, Mr. Denton got together 6 or 8 links to different utility board governance policies. This is Colorado Springs. This is double-sided. This is Owensboro's here in Kentucky. Owensboro's was so sophisticated that I pretty much set it aside. because I just didn't think we were there yet. But when I came up with the governance policy that everyone has had a chance, the original one without all the red lines and things, I didn't write it, I cut and pasted it. Because basically I just looked at the links that David had sent and of, like I said, about 6 or 8 other governance board policies, and saw what I thought would fit with us and just cut and pasted it and applied it to the plant board. For me personally, when I was new to this board, I would have really appreciated being able to have some written policy that I could have gone to refer to, because when I had some questions on some things that were happening amongst the board, there was nothing in writing. The bylaws didn't cover anything, and so there was no written policy. And so that really said to me the benefit of having a board governance policy. I think the board we have right now is all pretty versed on boards and probably doesn't need it as much. But we're not always going to be here. And I just, whether we take what Hans and John Cubine and I have worked on and cut down and change some language or whatever, or whether we do like Steve wants to do, I don't have a great deal of, it doesn't matter to me. At the end of the day, I just want to have a board governance policy with some specific policy guidance that I think would benefit this board. And I think, in looking at Owensboro's and looking at Colorado Springs and all of these different board governance policies, they all have pretty much the same thing. And so if these issues haven't come up with other boards, I don't think they would all have those same things in the policies. And so there has to be some benefit of having a board governance policy, or I don't think and I just sort of Googled today and just trying to think. And I just in a quick Google of municipal board governance policies, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that came up. So they're out there. We're not reinventing the wheel. And I would just really hope that we can, through some process of all of us being able to work together, to come up with the document that we can approve. And thank you.
John, Kathryn?
Go ahead, Kathryn. You got anything? Let me talk about a couple of things first off. And we've kind of conflated this stuff. We were talking about ethics, and now all of a sudden we're talking about board governance. Let me go back quickly to the ethics thing. The ethics stuff that we have in front of us right now is, where does that come along with it? Is this pretty much the city moved over to ours and makes us pretty much just the same as what the city is? And that's
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Largely.
It's pretty much the exact same. It's the exact same financial disclosure form, correct?
Yes, sir. With the exception, we changed the amounts to from one of them from like $100 to $50, but with the exception of that, it's the same.
I mean, I would be of a mind to take the same policy where applicable and move it over to us for ethics, and I would use the exact same financial disclosure form as the city does. I think we're a product of the city. I think it makes more sense to do it that way. I think it keeps us, the 65A070, which I looked up this afternoon, if we take what the city does and say we adopt this as ours as well, whatever language we have to put in about our own board and all that kind of stuff, that's fine. That's all fine with me. The only question I did have about that, and we really don't have a lot of choice in it because, the statute requires us to do it, the financial disclosure statements, are they public record?
Yes, sir.
They are. And you would redact, would you be able to redact the information, or?
That's a good question. I think you could redact things like your home address, perhaps.
Okay.
But
the name would still go along with it?
But the name would still be there, yes, sir.
From my experience in the state auditor's office, we used to assist the State Ethics Commission on doing some work review. And as I remember, they're, except like you said, for like address, phone number, social security number, everything in that form is public.
Yeah, okay. And I guess the only other question I have about this, and there's not going to be a lot we can do about it, is, you know, I'm thinking of my personal thing. My wife has some assets that I don't have any claim to. And, you know, she's on the account or whatever herself. You know, Kentucky, I don't think, is a community property state. So, so they have, the spouse or family member would have to report those things, even if I don't have any claim to them at all, I guess.
Like I said, that's a good question as far as what the board, And
I don't know how the city, takes that for their folks as well.
Let's see, the questions go through businesses. I don't see a question that would ask for your spouse, ask for creditors and so forth. Okay. Have you ever seen an instance of that, Ms. Hale, where you looked at some?
It asks for spouse's employment and
as other employers of spouse.
Right.
I don't think you would have, if I look at question number 10, sources of gross income, if it's not your income, then that would exclude.
Well, you're talking about, if you look at you and your immediate family, 10 and 11 both talk about you and your immediate family.
10 has filer and it lists spouse under. You have filer and spouse when you look down below. 11 has filer and spouse
as well. Yeah. So, and if it's what the city does, I mean, we don't have a lot of choice in it. And like I said, and the other thing about the whole financial disclosure thing is, this is a board right now that happens to have folks that were state employees, or still in my case are a state employee. We kind of live under that whole thing of, you're a state employee, somebody wants to go find out what you get paid, you can go to a public available website, you can find out exactly how much I get paid a year. So, there's not a lot of mystery in all that. But some of this information, you don't know if you have somebody who's not a state employee, would filling out this financial disclosure give them pause to do it. And that's just a question I bring up, but if we have to do at least what the city does, I just don't think we have a lot of choice in it.
Okay, but John, this isn't asking for how much
I know.
we have. It's just the sources.
I know. Yeah.
But yeah, this is the city's financial disclosure.
And I would be of a mind to make everything move right along with the city, Dawn. I wouldn't even try to do anything any more stringent.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't think we need to do it any more stringent.
No.
I just think we need to be as stringent.
Yeah. Well, moving the 50 to 100 or whatever, I think we just need to move that back to where it was. And I'm fine with the ethics stuff and the financial stuff now. But we're discussing all this tonight. We're not voting on anything tonight.
So. No, and the idea would be is, I think what comes up after this discussion, like you said, we've noticed it, and this is a special meeting. So even if we wanted to vote tonight and change our mind, we can't.
We can't, right?
But I think at this point, if we're of a mind to proceed with the ethics and the financial disclosure, then we could schedule that on the agenda in August for action. And like I said, the whole discussion on the 50 versus 100 it's under the section of going to make a speech or something. And the whole question was, if you're going to speak on plant board, now if you were in private business and you were making a speech on workers' comp, you can get whatever they want to pay, but if you're going to speak somewhere on plant board, then that's where we changed it, from 100 back down to 50?
Right.
Yes. Hands. So I guess the question is, Kathryn, we haven't got to you yet.
I mean, I'm of the mindset that we should just probably adopt exactly what the city's doing. It looks like we don't really have a choice to at least do that much.
And this would apply to all employees, is that right, Hans?
What the city has it applying to, I've got too many papers, shuffle.
Yeah, it's just management.
Major management.
Yeah.
So where would the cutoff be within this organization?
Well, Just the department heads.
Okay.
Department heads, okay.
And that's how it is in the city, it's just the department
Yeah.
heads.
Okay.
So it would be the board, Gary, and department,
Department
the
heads, okay.
upper management.
And it does also include anybody involved in procurement? Because I know the states deals with if anybody's involved in the procurement process, it extends it to them because,
I don't think the cities does.
because the states takes it, because if you're writing RFPs, evaluating them and awarding them, again, it's something we need to decide if we want to expand to that. But I know the states is basically department heads down, basically it's non-merit.
Right.
Includes division directors, but it does, I think, expand to people in major procurement areas.
Yeah.
Not somebody who, is making small purchases, but if somebody's awarding RFPs, writing specs or whatever, and that's something just whether we want to go that far or not. So again, we're not taking a motion or a vote on this, but what I'm kind of gathering at this point, the general consensus is that, everybody's got time. We won't be deciding the agenda for another 3 weeks or so for the next board meeting. But if we don't hear anything different, if nobody has any misgivings, then we'll probably put this on the agenda for the August meeting to discuss it. If that's, can we go that far, Hans?
Yes, sir.
I can say that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, I think you can do that. I'm just trying to think of maybe some easy administrative way to adopt. Instead of editing this, I tried to take. There might be some nuances with our statute that talks about family members of the board relations within the third degree to the general manager, the mayor, and the city. Might be some little changes we need to make, and then just adopt. Trying to think of some standardized language we could use, unless otherwise required by law. We're gonna apply the city's policy
where applicable, and
yes, and then where there's a statutory exception, you can go back to that. Something that I'll work on, or Miss Helen and we can work on that in the board. So.
Okay.
John, if you don't mind,
Sure.
the other thing, and Dawn and I have talked about this specifically. I think I'm probably a little bit more on Steve's wavelength about the governance policy. As Hans mentioned earlier, I did a few things in here gave me pause. The whole idea of disciplining members. I don't think you want to set us up to write a check that we can't cash, because I don't know what we can do in terms of disciplining members. I also have some real concerns regarding the section on voting, passing especially the passing on the idea of reconsideration. That the motion for reconsideration, that item on page, I think page 5, talks about 6 months having elapsed. You can bring up a motion for reconsideration 6 months, and to me that just seems out of bounds. The idea of a board member not being allowed to pass unless they can demonstrate some inherent conflict, that if we don't vote yes or no, it's automatically considered yes. I've got some real concerns with that, and just several other areas. But it just as on the whole, I just think we maybe need to start with our bylaws and maybe build out from our bylaws, or Steve said, figure out what are the important things we need to deal with, what do we need to put down. Don't necessarily worry about what other people have done, and figure out what is important to us, and then how do we move those into, and if it has to be a separate governance document, that's fine. If we can amend the bylaws to do it, that would be fine as well. I just am not sure what problem we're trying to solve by the document in front of us. So that's all I've really got to say on that.
Kathryn, Dawn, Steve. One thing.
I agree with the first part y'all were talking about, though.
One of the things that we've had a discussion on before, at least 1 or 2 meetings ago, is, and of course with the kind of the increase in the number of positive cases, I'm not sure of the exact timing, but we've got the governance issue, which probably lends itself to be a good topic for a work session. the compensation study, which Gary's working on to bring something to us on compensation, and do we amend our current compensation policy and go to a different style policy. That was kind of triggered when we had our whole discussion on salary increases this year. Personnel and affirmative action, which Steve's working on. John, you've been looking at the scholarship area. I know, Kathryn, there's some areas that you're wanting to take a look at. I don't think we could schedule a work session. I don't know that the situation's going to be such to even try to schedule a work session before the August meeting. But maybe sometime after the August board meeting, before the September, maybe we could work out a work session and have the opportunity, of course that'd be public, but have a work session to walk through some of these and see if we could get something ready on any of these areas to review at the September meeting. And maybe Dawn, you can look at, John, you can look at some of the key areas that might fit into a bylaw. And of course, there's nothing exclusive about this. If anybody has thoughts or whatever, send them to Hans. And that way we don't get in any trouble in terms of more than two of us talk about it, but send ideas to Hans, and Hans can work through things, incorporate them, and do drafts for information and share them.
Yes, that will help me a lot if I can get, if people have comments, to try to help me compile everybody's thoughts and then kind of send edits back out. Just to make sure I understand what we're seeking for August is the ethics and the financial disclosure, and then we're going to kind of debate and think about the governance a little bit.
Yeah, the governance won't be, unless someone wants to do something different, governance would not be on the agenda in August. That would be the subject of a work session.
Okay, yes, sir.
But between now, from this point forward, anybody's got any thoughts about governance or anything else, changes, additions to the documents that you and Dawn have worked on, to send those comments to you. And that way we stay clear of encouraging board members to have private conversation. That way all that information is flowing to you and you can distill it, do revisions, and keep everything where there's only one place all that information resides.
Yeah, that's helpful. But we'll have the ethics and the financial disclosures for August, and then I'll try to, as I get comments, try to compile those and keep a running update for everybody. So
does that work for everybody?
Yeah, I've waited this long. I can wait a few more months.
Okay. Next item is the discussion of electric cost of service. And just on this one, I guess, Vint, you're going to head this one, but just for a little background, Kathryn, for this to be the second year, we're giving out the credits or rebates to customers since we went with KyMEA. And what was the last meeting, I guess, Steve Mason asked about going forward. At some point, we've got to have a discussion whether we continue to do the rebates, this one-time adjustment, or we actually lower the rates. And I think there's advantages. People like to see it all in one lump sum on their bill, so they actually see what it is. Once you lower the rates, then it just kind of becomes of your bill. But in fact, by the time we swing around this again and we do this cost of service, we'll have 3 years of track record. And is that the time to do something with the rates? So at this point, Vint, take it.
Yes, sir. As you said, the board previously requested a timeline so that we could have a discussion on the timing of the next electric cost of service study. So just as a reminder, in keeping with good utility practice, it is advisable to conduct periodic cost and cost allocation reviews to ensure that our retail rates, they generate adequate revenue, and they're based on a consideration of our wholesale power cost, our operating expenses, adequate working capital, and reserves. As a reminder, our last cost of service study for the electric department was approved in 2013, and since that time the plant board has seen significant changes in our wholesale power supplies we've obviously discussed. So I think from that standpoint, it does make good utility sense to move forward with the cost of service study relatively in the next, I don't know if there's some timeline we have to do it by a certain time. We don't, of course, but I think moving forward that fairly soon would be something I think would probably make good utility practice sense. The timeline that I've kind of laid out here is based on the premise that we would try to do it as soon as we could, and the second premise would be that we would wait until we get a little more information on KyMEA's next moves on power supply. So as we mentioned earlier, the KyMEA Integrated Resource Plan is expected to be finished in December of 2020. After they take that information in, every year they have produced the rates the new rates at some point between February and April. Usually, I think maybe the board has approved it in April. I'm saying usually, but this is only the second year. So they would approve those rates in April. And then after having that information, along with all of our test year that we have, we would work with the consultant through April to July of 21 to conduct that study. Probably sometime around July of 21, that could be presented to the board at its regular board meeting. Depending on what the study recommended, if there was a rate change proposed, that would require, of course, a public hearing. It looks like maybe August of 21 would then be, a regular meeting would be the public hearing. September of 21 would then be the first month when the board would be able to take action on any recommendations for rate changes. And then to keep the way we've done it in the past, after the board approves, the beginning of the next month, October 1, 2020, would be when those new rates would take effect. So again, that would be the earliest that I think we could reasonably do it.
Will we need to engage a consultant to help us with the study?
Yes, sir, I believe we would. We've always done that in the past. I think that gives you a good independent review to look at your study. Usually they take 3 to 4 months is what they've, the timing in the past. And generally they've been somewhere in the mid $30,000 range back when we did those. So.
And you included that, David, didn't you, in the budget? The assumption?
No, this is not included in this budget.
Rate study?
We were expecting that this has been bumped up a couple of months as this fastest possible timeline. We were kind of assuming we might do it in the next budget year, start it in the next budget cycle. So it was not included in the current budget year we're in. But this fastest proposed timeline would require a budget amendment.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Steve, you initially brought this up. Do you have any questions?
Not really, but I guess, and again, this is, in my opinion, a very high-level thought, is that if we've been able to get rebates in the last 2 years, and the last time an electrical rate study was done was 2013, and technically we should be going downward. I mean, so when we get to the budget cycle in 2021, assume mathematically, as soon as we could still give a rebate because it should be less than the 2013 rate, which is, I guess, what we have started basing things on. We're still basing things on. If that made any sense.
Yeah.
I know
No, yeah. And I might mention, this, Kathryn, in the KyMEA savings, one of the other things we've been able to do, and David, you might address this, in constructing the new reservoir, we actually are going to be able to loan the money for the reservoir. We don't commingle our revenues. We keep electric supports electric, water supports water, telecom. So rather than go out to the market and pay for a commercial money or a KIA loan or whatever for the reservoir, in fact, the reservoir project will be financed with some of our savings, and then the water will pay that back into the fund, because water otherwise would be subsidized, electric would be subsidized in water, but we're going to be able to avoid lending costs and in fact pay our self-interest. Is that fair, David?
Yes, sir, that's accurate. Yeah, we have a $4.5 million budgeted from this current fiscal year from the electric to water division for the water reservoir, and then 2021-22, $3.25 million loaned internally to the water department as well for our advanced metering infrastructure project. It's definitely, the interest rate on a third-party lender or revenue bonds is higher than what we could get in a savings account. So it just makes sense to loan it to ourselves and we're actually going to have a 40% reduction in our long-term debt over that period of time, over the next 5 years. So we're going in a great direction when it comes to cash flow available we'll have from reduction in debt service that we can put back into infrastructure or whatever else the board chooses to do with it.
But basically, we've been able to give the rebates, self-fund our own debt, and freeze rates. So, Dawn, John? Kevin? Other questions? Steve, anything else you want to bring up on that?
Are you speaking to me?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Next item is number 9, information, general manager comments.
Mr. Chairman, I really don't have anything new. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. The one thing I just might mention, this is informational. We're not taking any action on this, is last meeting, we passed out, we discussed Gary's contract requires that he be evaluated every year. So we passed out the forms. Everybody conducted their evaluation, sent it in. I compiled them, went over those results with Gary. Everybody's got a copy of those. In terms of any salary adjustment or whatever for Gary, that'd be dealt with in January when we deal with employees' compensation, which we're already scheduled, so we don't have to take any action on that. But we've done the evaluation, and I think it's fair to say that everybody was pleased with the direction, what Gary's done with the company, what he's done through this pandemic, and the communications, and that he's had with the board, and both his competence and demeanor and everything. So I think everybody was very pleased, and we want to thank you, Gary, for your service. You've done a tremendous job for us. You want to make a speech or anything, or? No?
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Do we have anything else we need? I know we're limited as far as we can't take any action on anything, but is there anything else we need to bring up or discuss tonight?
John, we didn't need to formally adopt that. That's not something we formally, that evaluation is not.
Well, at this point, it's not on the agenda for formal action.
Okay.
But Gary does have the results.
And is it something we need to adopt as a board, Hans?
I don't think you would need to formally adopt it.
Okay. I was going to say, we can put it on the agenda next time if we need to.
Could you research that and see if we need to take any formal action? If not, just want to inform everybody got it.
Yeah.
It's compiled, it's been shared with Gary, and so if anybody has any, if we need to do something more formal, Hans, let us know, and
I think
make sure we put it on for August.
Okay.
I don't think you would, it's a good question. I don't think you would need to take any action, but I'll look and see what I think you could do.
Okay.
Either thing. But
okay.
We'll take a look. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? David, Vint, Dawn? Steve, you have any last parting thoughts?
None. I'm just going to watch my news here after y'all get off.
Damn. Gary, anything you or Hans want to add? Or? No. Okay. Well, thank everybody. And I know we kind of had to make some adjustments after the governor's, order amended some things. But thanks everybody, and thank the IT staff and everybody for making everything work tonight. So we appreciate it. Do you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Kathryn, you want a second? I'll second. Without any further discussion, we're adjourned. Thank you.